My name is Dina B. Velez, and I am 31 years old. They went to Iceland without me. I didn't hear it through a phone call or a family group chat or some excited plan shared over dinner. I found out the way I always seem to find out things in my family, after it's already happened, when the money has already moved, when the choice has already been made, when my role has already been decided for me. It started with a Facebook post. My cousin Becca, the kind of person who thinks hashtags are a personality, posted a picture of herself in a bright blue parka, standing on a glacier, throwing up a peace sign with one hand and holding a cup of overpriced Reykjavik coffee in the other. Her smile looked effortless, like she'd never had to question whether she belonged anywhere. The caption hit harder than it should have. Best family trip ever. Grateful for the one who made it happen. No tag. No mention. Just that sentence, sitting there like I was supposed to feel honored from a distance, like the money had floated down from the sky and paid for their cozy Airbnb and those geothermal spa selfies all by itself. Grateful for the one who made it happen. That one was me. $9,800. That's how much had been quietly drained from my account over 2 weeks, spread out in random charges just small enough to look like noise if you weren't paying attention. $740 to Iceland Air, $1,320 to a guest house with a name that looked like a keyboard accident, $500 here, $2,100 there. At first I told myself it had to be a mistake, a glitch, something I could laugh about once it was fixed. Then the pattern showed up, and the pattern is what scared me, because patterns mean intention. I noticed it a few days before they left. I remember standing in my kitchen, phone in hand, the bank app open, my coffee going cold. I called Aunt Marlene because she was the one who always handled the planning, the one who always had a spreadsheet, the one who could talk her way through anything with a smile that made you doubt your own instincts. When I asked her about the charges, she acted completely bewildered. She swore she had no idea how my card could have been used. She said maybe I'd been hacked. Maybe it was identity theft. She sounded so convincing that I did what I always do. I believed her. I didn't push. I didn't accuse. I didn't want to fight. I've always had this weakness when it comes to family, like my body physically rejects confrontation even when my brain is screaming for it. I don't like conflict. They know that. They've known it for years. They've built entire little routines around it. I was still trying to figure out what to do when they left. Not just one or two of them. All of them. My parents, my 2 aunts, Uncle Joe, Becca, her younger sister, Kelsey, and even my little brother, 9 people. 9 people on a family trip I hadn't been invited to. I wasn't even told they were going. I found out in the most humiliating way possible when my boss forwarded me a vacation request I hadn't submitted. I work in payroll. I know how to track a charge. I know how to follow a digital footprint. They were just careless enough to think I wouldn't. Or worse, they were confident enough to think it wouldn't matter, even if I did. I stared at that vacation request and felt something shift. It wasn't anger yet. It was that slow, nauseating clarity that comes when you realize you've been the last one to know the truth about your own life. But the thing that flipped the switch wasn't the post. It wasn't even the vacation request. It was a text. Late that night, while I was still staring at my bank app, my phone buzzed. A message from Aunt Marlene. I knew instantly it wasn't meant for me, because it didn't have her usual sweet tone. It didn't have emojis. It didn't have that fake warmth she used when she wanted something. It said she's too desperate to say anything. That was it. No context. No apology. Just that sentence, like I was some pathetic little wallet with a face. Like I was predictable. Like my silence was guaranteed. Like I'd take being used and still show up smiling, because that's what I'd always done. Something in me went very quiet after that. Not calm, not peace, more like a door closing. I stared at the words until the screen dimmed, then I tapped it awake and stared again, just to be sure I hadn't imagined it. She's too desperate to say anything. They were talking about me like I wasn't real, like I wasn't a person who would read it and feel her stomach drop. And maybe I had been that person. Maybe I had been desperate, not for their money, for their approval, for their love, for a seat at a table they kept moving just out of reach. So I did the one thing they clearly didn't expect. I called my bank. I reported every transaction I hadn't authorized. I filed a fraud report. I asked them to cancel and block anything that hadn't gone through yet. I had them flag my account, lock my card, tighten everything. Then I went further, because I wasn't just angry, I was awake. I had my bank reach out to Iceland Air and the guest house. I emailed the car rental company. I emailed the tour operators. I emailed the spa, the one I'd seen in their posts, the one I knew would be on their little list of must-do content. Anything with my name on it got canceled. Anything connected to my information got erased. I didn't cancel the flights. Those were the one thing they actually paid for themselves. Everything else, every cozy booking, every upgraded experience, every little luxury they'd quietly stapled to my identity, disappeared. By the time I finished, my hands weren't shaking anymore. That was the scariest part. I felt steady, like I'd finally stepped into a version of myself they didn't recognize. At 5:07 a.m. Iceland time, my phone buzzed violently on my nightstand. I was already awake. 22 missed calls. My dad called 7 times, Aunt Marlene called 5, Becca 4, my mom twice. The rest were unknown Iceland numbers, one of which I later realized was the guest house trying to confirm whether the cancellation was legitimate. Then came the message from my dad. How could you do this? Not what happened, not are you okay, not can we talk, just that, all caps, like I had ruined their vacation instead of stopping them from stealing almost 10 grand. I didn't reply. I turned off my phone, made myself some toast, and waited because I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. By the time I turned my phone back on that night, the trip was already collapsing, and I could tell without anyone saying it outright. The calls weren't just angry, they were panicked, layered with that specific kind of fear people get when they realize the safety net they've been using has snapped. I expected chaos. I expected screaming. I expected my mom's soft voice trying to sell me guilt like it was concern. What I didn't expect was how fast it all fell apart once the bank pushed one button. The first thing that broke was the guest house. It wasn't a hotel with a front desk and a manager you can charm. It was one of those self-check-in places where the entire stay is built on a lock code and an email confirmation. They'd gone out for the day, chasing waterfalls and black sand beaches, the kind of scenic things people like Becca post with captions about gratitude and healing. When they came back at around 4 in the afternoon local time, the door didn't open. Their code stopped working. Their luggage was inside, their little bags of duty-free perfume and souvenir sweaters locked behind a door that suddenly treated them like strangers. I didn't hear that from them directly. I heard it in pieces, like broken glass, a string of messages from an unknown Iceland number, a voicemail with my aunt's voice in the background, shrill and furious, yelling that this had to be a mistake. A screenshot my brother sent me later, no commentary, just proof of the guest house email, stating the booking had been canceled at the request of the account holder. Everything else followed. The SUV rental vanished. The tours were canceled. The spa turned them away at the gate. I pictured them standing there in swimsuits under gray skies, trying to argue their way into an experience they'd stolen, and for a second I felt something close to satisfaction. Then it passed, replaced by something colder. This wasn't petty. This was necessary. If I didn't stop it now, it would never stop. I didn't cancel their flights. That was the one thing they actually paid for themselves, probably because even they knew pushing that far would be too obvious. Everything else had my name on it. Everything else evaporated. At some point, Aunt Marlene received the bank email on my behalf. She didn't even bother lying anymore. She forwarded it to the family group chat and wrote, "Well, I guess she finally grew a spine." I wasn't in that chat, but my brother forwarded the screenshot to me privately. No message attached, just a silent delivery, like he wanted me to see what they were saying without forcing me to respond. They scrambled back to the States on emergency flights. I heard most of them came home early, cold and furious, and suddenly several thousand poorer than they'd expected to be. Becca and Kelsey stayed one extra night because they had content to finish, some influencer deal where they got a free meal in exchange for a post. That detail would have been funny if it wasn't my life. 2 days after they landed, they showed up at my house. I live alone in a duplex in Portland. It's not huge, but it's mine. I bought it after years of saving and swallowing the family jokes about me being the boring one, the safe one, the one who never took risks. They didn't know that the biggest risk I'd ever take was finally saying no. They pulled up mid-morning, my parents, Aunt Marlene, Uncle Joe, my brother, and Becca, because she couldn't resist watching a crisis up close. I opened the door because they were already pounding hard enough to rattle the frame, and I didn't want my neighbors calling the police before I decided what to do. It started civil, or fake civil. You could smell the tension under every word. My mom went first, taking the guilt route, asking why I hadn't come to them before canceling everything. Like I hadn't already asked about the charges before the trip. Like I hadn't given Marlene a chance to tell the truth and been handed a lie instead. Then Marlene stepped forward and took over, voice sharp, eyes wet, but not with remorse. She said I ruined a once-in-a-lifetime experience for the whole family. She said I humiliated them. She said I embarrassed my parents. She said it like the only crime in the room was that I refused to be quiet. Uncle Joe accused me of making them look like criminals. He actually used that word, criminals, like it was an insult I'd thrown at them instead of a label their behavior earned on its own. My dad stood in the back, arms crossed, silent, watching me like he was waiting for the moment I apologized and put everything back the way it was. My brother barely spoke. He sat down on my couch and stared at the carpet like he was trying to disappear. They stayed for 6 hours. 6. I didn't offer food. I didn't offer water. I didn't soften my voice. I just sat and let them pace my living room, scolding me like a child, blaming me for their fraud, their failure of a trip, their sudden inconvenience. At one point, Becca tried to guilt me by showing me photos of what could have been: waterfalls, ice caves, their smiling faces. She tilted her phone toward me, as if I was supposed to mourn the vacation I hadn't been invited to in the first place. My mom kept saying we could have handled this differently. My dad kept looking at me like he expected loyalty to override logic. Marlene's anger sharpened every minute, like she was afraid it would dull into shame if she stopped feeding it. Then Marlene finally said it. The real reason they were there. She said, "We think you should reimburse us for what you ruined." Something in me snapped, but it wasn't a scream. It was a clear, quiet click. I asked her if she wanted the full list of what they took from me, or just the dollar amount. The room went still for a second, like they weren't used to hearing me talk like that, like I'd broken character. They didn't like it. My dad finally spoke then, telling me I'd taken it too far. Uncle Joe stepped closer, like intimidation was a language I still understood. My mom started crying, the familiar kind of crying that always appeared when she wanted me to feel like the villain. I told them they had to leave. They didn't move. So I said the words I'd never said to them before, not seriously. "If you don't leave, I'm calling the police." That did it. They shuffled toward the door, angry, muttering, throwing last-minute insults like hooks. As my dad walked out, he turned around and said, "You think you're punishing us, but this is only going to make things worse for you." I didn't reply. I locked the door behind them, every bolt, every latch, and stood there listening to the silence settle back into the house like dust after a storm. I thought maybe that would be the end. 6 hours of humiliation on both sides. 6 hours of them seeing I wasn't bending. I thought they'd go home and cool off, even if they hated me for it. They didn't. I didn't hear from any of them for a few days. No calls, no messages. I blocked almost everyone except my brother. He never said much, even when they were in my living room, but he hadn't attacked me either. Something about him felt different, like he knew this was wrong but didn't know how to survive inside a family that rewarded silence. 3 days later, he texted me one line: "They're planning to come back." No follow-up, no explanation, just a warning. I stared at it, then set my phone down and looked around my house, at the walls I'd paid for, the locks I'd installed, the life I'd built while they treated me like a resource. And I knew, with a calm that scared me, that they weren't coming back to talk. They were coming back to take control. That Saturday, it happened exactly the way my brother warned me it would. Around 2 in the afternoon, I saw the car before I heard anything else. Uncle Joe's ugly white SUV rolled up and parked crooked at the corner, half blocking a fire hydrant, oil already leaking into my neighbor's driveway like it was marking territory. I recognized it instantly. My chest tightened, but my hands didn't shake. Not anymore. I didn't rush to the door. I stood in my living room and watched through the front window as my parents got out first, followed by Aunt Marlene and Uncle Joe. And this time, instead of Becca, Kelsey climbed out of the back seat, wearing denim shorts and a hoodie, arms crossed, like she'd been dragged into something she didn't want to witness but wasn't willing to stop. They rang the bell. Once, then twice, then harder. I could hear my dad saying my name through the door, his voice casual, almost friendly, like this was a normal visit and not the second attempt to intimidate me into submission. I didn't move for a full minute. I stood there, watching them through the peephole, memorizing their faces, the impatience, the entitlement, the certainty that I would eventually open the door because I always had before. When I finally opened it, I kept the latch on. Just enough space to make eye contact. My mom spoke first. "Can we just talk?" she said, already stepping forward like the answer didn't matter. "No," I said, calm, clear. "I said everything the last time you were here." Her face shifted, half pleading, half furious. She said they weren't leaving until we worked this out. Like this was a misunderstanding. Like they hadn't stolen nearly $10,000 and vacationed on it without telling me. I told them they had 10 seconds to get off my property. That's when my mom wedged her foot into the door. I don't know if it was instinct or adrenaline or years of swallowed anger, but I shoved the door harder than I meant to. She stumbled backward and grabbed the railing, staring at me like I'd crossed some invisible line she never thought I would. Uncle Joe stepped forward, chest puffed out, ready to say something threatening, but I already had my phone up, camera on, my finger hovering over the call button. "I recorded the last visit," I said. "You're trespassing, and this is the last time you're coming to my house without a court order." That stopped them, not because they respected me, but because they understood consequences when they were spelled out slowly enough. They left angry, not sulking, furious. My dad lingered at the bottom of the porch, saying nothing, just staring up at me like he was daring me to flinch. Aunt Marlene shook her head the whole way to the car, muttering to herself, hands trembling like she was holding herself back. Kelsey slammed the door so hard it echoed down the street. Not one of them looked back. That night, I left all the lights on. Every room. I slept on the couch with my phone in my hand and my keys on the table, listening to every sound outside like it meant something. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, my car told me everything I needed to know. The driver's side mirror was shattered, hanging by a wire. A deep, narrow dent sat just above the front wheel, sharp and deliberate, like someone wanted to make sure I understood it wasn't an accident. This wasn't random vandalism. This was a message. I walked the block, asking neighbors if they'd seen anything. No one had. No doorbell cameras pointed the right way. No witnesses. Except mine. I pulled up the footage and felt my stomach drop. At 2:40 in the morning, their SUV rolled back onto the street. No masks, no hesitation. Uncle Joe walked up holding something that looked like a metal pipe. Kelsey hung back, laughing, her hands shoved into her hoodie sleeves. My mom stood by the car, watching, like she was on lookout duty. Less than 2 minutes. Then they were gone. I didn't call them. I didn't text. I didn't threaten. I saved the footage, backed it up in 3 places. Then I sat down and stared at the screen until the last trace of doubt drained out of me. This wasn't about hurt feelings anymore. It wasn't about a canceled trip or family drama. This was intimidation, control, punishment. And that was the moment I stopped hoping it would end quietly. Because if they thought that was the end of it, they were about to learn what it felt like when someone finally fought back, for real. I drove to the police station as soon as it opened. I didn't pace the decision or talk myself out of it the way I used to. I walked in with the footage queued up on my phone, timestamps clear as day, Uncle Joe in his ratty hoodie holding what looked like a tire iron, Kelsey hanging back and laughing, my mom standing by the SUV like a lookout. No masks, no attempt to hide, just confidence built on years of getting away with things because no one ever pushed back. The officer at the desk didn't say much while he watched. Halfway through the clip, his expression changed. Not shocked, just focused. When it ended, he looked up and asked one question. "Do you want to press charges?" "Yes," I said immediately. No hesitation. It wasn't about the mirror or the dent anymore. It wasn't even about the money. It was the way they kept showing up like they still owned a piece of me, like I owed them access, obedience, silence. They didn't arrest anyone that day. It doesn't work that fast. I knew that. What I didn't expect was what happened 2 days later. The footage got out. I still don't know how. I'd only given it to the officer, and I had it backed up on a USB at home. But suddenly it was everywhere. A local subreddit posted it with a title that made my chest tighten and my jaw set at the same time. "Family from Hell destroys cousin's car after Iceland fraud." By noon, there were hundreds of comments. By evening, thousands. I hadn't posted it. I hadn't sent it to anyone. Someone else decided the truth didn't need my permission to travel. Maybe it came from the precinct. Maybe my brother sent it. I never asked, and no one ever told me. What I saw instead was the fallout. People started tagging Becca and Kelsey on Instagram. Someone dug up Aunt Marlene's Facebook and dropped the clip into the comments under her Iceland photos. Uncle Joe's home renovation business page lit up with one-star reviews, dozens of them, all asking the same question: is this how you handle disputes? Suddenly, they weren't just angry, they were humiliated. They came back again that night, but this time they didn't knock. I heard car doors slam and shouting from the yard. When I looked out the window, they were already screaming, not at the door, but into the open air, like they wanted the neighbors to hear. My mom yelled that I'd ruined her life. Aunt Marlene cried real tears, screaming that I'd turned them into internet monsters. My dad threatened to sue me. Uncle Joe shouted that the footage was doctored, that I'd set him up. I didn't open the door. I stood behind it and dialed 911, holding the phone up so they could hear the ring. Loud enough to cut through the shouting. Loud enough to make them freeze, just long enough for the dispatcher to pick up. They scattered before the police arrived, peeling away like they'd been caught doing something they never expected to be punished for. That night, my brother came by unannounced. He looked pale and exhausted, like he hadn't slept since Iceland. He said he couldn't stay with them anymore, didn't want to be around the yelling or the planning or the way they kept trying to rewrite what had happened. I didn't ask questions. I let him in. Then he told me something that changed the shape of everything. They'd taken more than money. Before the trip, Aunt Marlene had used my saved information to access my travel accounts. All of them. Nearly 190,000 points I'd been saving for years were gone, burned on seat upgrades, premium tours, luxury experiences they'd been bragging about online. He handed me screenshots. I didn't ask how he got them. I didn't need to. The proof was there, clean and undeniable. That was when it stopped being personal. This wasn't a messy family fight. It was calculated, deliberate, and now I had evidence. By the next morning, it blew up beyond anything I expected. The subreddit post went viral. Mid-size YouTubers stitched together the footage with Becca's vacation posts and old complaints about Uncle Joe's business. I didn't feed the fire, but I didn't stop it either. I ignored interview requests. I declined podcasts. I stayed quiet while the truth did what it does when you finally let it breathe. My brother stayed on my couch, barely touching his food, asking questions in a voice that sounded like he was trying to understand the cost of everything we'd grown up calling normal. I told him I'd hired a lawyer. He didn't ask who paid. A week passed. Then my mom called from a blocked number. Her voice was calm in a way that felt rehearsed. She said they wanted to make peace, that everything had spiraled, that they were open to solutions. I told her I'd think about it. That night, my brother asked me if I'd ever considered wearing a wire. I laughed at first, then stopped when I realized he wasn't joking. He said he'd overheard my dad and Aunt Marlene talking in the backyard, thinking no one was listening. They weren't planning peace. They were planning a trap. They wanted me to admit I canceled everything out of spite, to say the charges were authorized just once, enough to muddy the legal water. So I agreed to meet them. Public place, coffee shop, cameras everywhere. My lawyer cleared it. I recorded everything. My brother sat at another table with his phone angled toward us. My dad and Aunt Marlene came in smiling, ordered drinks, asked about work like nothing had happened. I let them talk. They offered a deal, drop everything, and they'd reimburse me $3,000, 3 out of nearly 10,000 stolen and 190,000 points burned, blaming flight rebooking and emotional stress. Then Aunt Marlene said the line they couldn't take back. "We all know you canceled everything just to punish us. You didn't really think it was fraud." I said nothing. I finished my drink and left. I sent the recording to my lawyer the second we got home. That night, someone egged my windows. I didn't care. They had no idea what was coming next. 2 weeks later, I got the call. The police were moving forward. Criminal charges for unauthorized use of my financial information and willful property damage. The audio and video showing intent mattered. My dad and Aunt Marlene admitting the fraud and trying to bait me into a false confession mattered. The detective said it would likely start with Uncle Joe. He was already on thin ice with his business practices. Then came the IRS. Someone had tipped them off. Unreported income, payments routed through Venmo accounts, fake charity names used to get discounts. The vacation wasn't a one-off, it was a pattern. A federal investigator visited me, no trench coats, just a gray suit and careful questions. I handed over the screenshots, the recordings, the USB my brother gave me. They asked to speak to him too. I left that choice to him. By the time subpoenas were served, my family had imploded. Becca deleted her Instagram. Uncle Joe shut down his business. Aunt Marlene vanished online. My parents went silent. And for the first time, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like proof. 5 months passed, and the noise finally faded into something like quiet. Not peace, not forgiveness, just space. The lawsuits were moving forward without much resistance. Most of the $9,800 had come back through the fraud claim and the civil case they stopped contesting once criminal charges were on the table. My travel points were reinstated after weeks of documentation and phone calls that made my head ache. I changed passwords, closed accounts, rebuilt the parts of my life they'd treated like a communal resource. My brother found his own place, a small apartment with a friend, and told me he needed distance, not just from them, but from the version of himself that learned survival meant staying quiet. He said he was proud of me. I didn't ask him to repeat it, but I let it settle. Then the invitation arrived. No return address, thick envelope, cream paper with heavy calligraphy that felt intentionally expensive, like it wanted to announce itself before I even opened it. I stood in my kitchen staring at it, already knowing it wasn't harmless. Becca was getting married. In Iceland. Again. Inside the envelope was the invitation, dramatic and glossy, followed by a smaller card that made my hands go cold. This celebration is made possible by the generosity of our beloved cousin, Dina. They didn't just invite me. They credited me as the benefactor, the sponsor, the silent savior funding their comeback. To make it worse, the RSVP card was already checked yes. An airline voucher was clipped inside, like I'd been written back into their story without being asked, like consent was just another thing they felt entitled to. I hadn't given them $1. I hadn't spoken to any of them since the vandalism, since the police, since the subpoenas. And yet here it was, a whole new narrative where everything had been forgiven, forgotten, and quietly paid for by me. My brother got an invitation too, minus the sponsor line. He showed me his, and then mine, side by side, disbelief written all over his face. He told me they'd been telling people we'd made up, that Iceland had been a misunderstanding, that the internet had blown it out of proportion. According to Aunt Marlene, this wedding was about restoring peace. We sat there for a long time, the invitation between us like a dare. Then my brother said something that surprised me. He said he wanted to go. Not to celebrate, to end it. He pulled a small microphone and a tiny GoPro out of his bag, things he'd bought quietly, deliberately. He said he planned to sit through the ceremony, wait for Becca's inevitable thank you speech, the one where she'd publicly credit me for making her dream wedding possible, and then stand up and tell the truth. Calm, clear, undeniable, about the fraud, the stolen money, the travel points, the vandalism, the police reports, the lawsuits, all of it, recorded, unedited. He said they thought this wedding would bury everything. Instead, it would expose it one last time in front of everyone they were trying so hard to impress. I didn't stop him. I didn't push him either. I just looked at him and realized something I hadn't felt in a long time. They didn't control the story anymore. Not mine, not his. I declined the RSVP. I shredded the airline voucher. And before he left, I told my brother one thing. Tell the truth. That's the only thing they never planned for. I didn't go to Iceland. I didn't watch a live stream. I went to work like it was any other day. I answered emails. I ate lunch at my desk. Around noon, my phone buzzed once. A single text from my brother. It's done. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. The fallout reached me anyway. Messages from distant relatives, awkward apologies, a few silences that finally felt permanent. Someone sent me a link to a video already copied and reposted more times than I could count. My brother stood during the reception, voice steady, hands not shaking, and told the truth without insults or drama. He even played a short audio clip, Aunt Marlene admitting they knew it wasn't authorized. The room didn't erupt. It didn't have to. You could see it in people's faces, the recalculation, the realization that they'd been applauding a lie. After that, everything moved quickly. The remaining cases settled. Uncle Joe's business never reopened. Aunt Marlene stopped answering calls. My parents didn't reach out again. No apology, no anger, just absence. And for the first time, that absence felt like relief instead of loss. I got most of my money back. I closed the files, I locked the doors. I stopped explaining myself. They went to Iceland without me. They tried to erase me, then rewrite me when it suited them. They thought I'd stay quiet. They were wrong. I didn't just cancel a vacation. I ended a system. And when I finally stepped out of my assigned role, the whole thing collapsed on its own.